My name is Valerie Lin. I'm 34. PhD in Renewable Systems Engineering. Patent holder. Former director of R&D at Voltura Industries. And for one long minute, I thought I was about to become the first woman to lead my family's company. I was wrong. It was a Wednesday morning. Spring rain tapped the glass wall of the executive suite. The boardroom smelled like coffee, glass cleaner, and rehearsed decisions. I sat at the far end of the table, a folder of projected charts in front of me. Not that anyone was looking at them, not even my father. He sat at the head of the table, fingers laced over a leather-bound planner. His tie was maroon, a power color. The same one he wore the day he handed me my first lab budget. But this time, his eyes didn't say trust, they said verdict. To his left sat Marcus, my cousin, CFO, and occasional echo chamber. To his right, the chairman of the board, a man who once told me I was too logical to lead. They called the meeting to discuss leadership realignment. I'd spent the past 3 nights preparing for it, pitching the evolution of Voltura from fossil-based infrastructure to distributed solar storage hybrids. FluxGrid, a proprietary system I designed over the last 6 years. It could have cut energy loss by 40%. It could have changed how underfunded cities stored and reused power. It could have made us more than rich. It could have made us responsible, but that wasn't what they wanted. My father cleared his throat. "Valerie," he said, formal and cold, "we've reviewed your proposal." He paused, not for dramatic effect. He just liked hearing himself wait. "It's ambitious, but misaligned with where Voltura is heading." "Misaligned," I blinked. "I don't understand." Marcus slid a folder toward me, black leather, Voltura embossed in silver. Inside, a press release, a draft acquisition plan, a new CTO announcement, not my name, and at the bottom, a termination letter. Effective immediately, all R&D projects led by Dr. Valerie Lin will be absorbed into the corporate IP archive. Further access to classified company files and databases is revoked. I didn't react. Didn't scream, didn't cry. I just sat there as silence pressed in like concrete. Finally, I asked, "Did you even read the efficiency curve?" Marcus didn't answer. He didn't have to. The chairman spoke instead. "We don't need idealism. We need expansion. And expansion comes through dominance, not disruption." I looked at my father, my voice low. "Even, you're not protecting the company, you're preserving your relevance." He narrowed his eyes. "You think I'm afraid of innovation?" I smiled. "No, you're afraid of not owning it." Security was called. Not because I was dangerous, but because I was inconvenient. I walked out without looking back. No final words, no dramatic monologue, just one thing in my pocket. A 2 GB USB drive, the old kind, shaped like a lightning bolt. It didn't contain full models, just a sandbox, a few loose frameworks. Enough. I took the long way home. Through downtown, past the power lines I once dreamed of replacing, past the banner that read Voltura, fueling the future. How poetic, they only ever saw the future if they could trademark it. I didn't go back to my apartment. I went to a cabin in Colorado. No signal, no noise, no expectations. For 2 weeks I barely spoke to anyone, just coded, ran simulations. Watched snow fall outside the frosted window while digital nodes danced on my screen. And then, on a night when the wind howled louder than memory, an email came through on the satellite relay, from a name I barely remembered. Nina Park. One line, "I studied your open course in undergrad. I know what FluxGrid was meant to be. If you're rebuilding, I'd like to help." And just like that, the power they stole began to hum again. For the first time in years, I wasn't building something for anyone else. Not for a grant. Not for a board meeting. Not for approval. Just for the idea. And for the girl I used to be, who once built windmill blades from chopsticks and fan motors in her mom's laundry room. The one who thought electricity was magic. Because in her house, it was. I spent that winter in an abandoned ranger cabin at the edge of a failed wind farm. Cold mornings, broken heaters, and more error logs than daylight. But the quiet helped. Silence clears out all the voices that don't belong to you. And then, there was Nina. She showed up in a dusty blue truck, boots covered in red clay, laptop bag slung over one shoulder. "You really weren't kidding," she said, eyeing the solar rig I'd jerry-rigged from discarded panels. "Not about any of it." I looked at her, short black hair, hands calloused from actual field work. She was the opposite of the boardroom. She believed in what we were doing, not because it would scale, but because it could help. That night, we sat across from each other at a folding table, the only light coming from a halogen lamp wired to a prototype battery. She scrolled through my code in silence, paused, scrolled back, then again, then she said, "This could work." We started over. No budget, no branding, just lines of code, salvaged parts, and two women who knew what the world could be if the right people were left out of the room. We called it LYNX, not because it sounded cool, because it described the design, interconnected, flexible, and impossible to kill from one point. Each micro station could absorb, store, and redistribute power, independent but cooperative, like nerves in a shared body, or women in an ignored system. 3 months in, we had our first working node. 2 car batteries, 3 panels, a salvaged inverter, powering 5 homes across a half-mile radius. But that wasn't the real breakthrough. That came on a rainy night in March. I was rerouting a data log when I heard Nina behind me. She'd gone into town to pick up supplies. She dropped a folder on the table. Old, cream-colored, handwritten on the flap, Lin Nguyen Estate Personal Trust. I froze, my mother's name. "I got it from the law office," Nina said quietly. "It was sealed until you turned 30. Your dad petitioned to keep it inactive, but he's not listed as guardian anymore." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, a letter from my mother. A list of community projects. A trust fund worth $5 million. Earmarked for sustainable development for women-led engineering ventures. She had written, "If they ever try to silence you, use this. Not to fight, but to finish." I hadn't cried when I was fired. Not when the board humiliated me. Not when the company erased my name. But I cried that night, in a shed powered by sunlight and belief, because somewhere, somehow, my mother had built me a second chance, a quiet rebellion written in trust documents and intention. Within 6 weeks, LYNX Energy was incorporated. We didn't rent a fancy office. We bought out an abandoned schoolhouse with good bones and south-facing windows. Our first hires: an Afghan refugee with a background in civil electrical design. A single mother who used to wire up car batteries to run her home off-grid. A quiet queer programmer who had been fired from a tech startup for not being a culture fit. We weren't building a company, we were building a cause. The calls started coming in, not from investors, from community leaders, from school districts, from border towns, from refugee camps. All saying the same thing: "We can't wait for the government. Can you help us now?" So we did. We deployed 10 test sites across the Southwest. Each one improved the model. Each mistake taught us faster than any pitch deck ever could. We uploaded every improvement into our open ledger. No one could steal what everyone could see. That summer, a woman named Harriet Dawson called, a UN-affiliated director for energy access initiatives. She had found our white paper buried in an academic journal no one read, but she read it. And then she flew out. She didn't ask for a pitch. She asked for a tour. And when she saw our prototype facility in New Mexico, she asked just one question: "Can you do this across 200 villages?" Nina looked at me. I looked at the blueprint on the wall. I remembered the words in my mother's letter. And I said, "We can do 250 if you let us run it our way." Harriet smiled. "That's the only reason I'm here." Later that night, Nina leaned against the window frame and whispered, "They really thought they could end you with one meeting." I turned back to my screen, where the LYNX dashboard showed our first 1,000 users coming online. "They didn't end me," I said. "They just made sure no one could shut me down again." Power, I learned, doesn't have to be loud to change the world. Sometimes it hums. Sometimes it flickers through the walls of a schoolhouse in Arizona, or runs a dialysis machine in a border town clinic during a blackout. At LYNX, we didn't shout about our impact. We let the light speak for us. By fall, our microgrids were powering over 10,000 homes across the Southwest. From mobile reservations in New Mexico to farming towns in southern Utah. No contracts, no bureaucracy, just clean, affordable energy that never asked who you voted for or what your zip code was. The LYNX network was growing, not in scale, but in soul. Each node was its own heartbeat. Each user had access to real-time energy logs. If a system failed, neighbors rerouted supply within seconds. No top-down control. No throttling, just power that belonged to the people. And the world noticed. The UN initiative turned into an international pilot. Our data was cited in 2 policy papers. Then came the surprise email from the US. Department of Energy. We are evaluating distributed storage systems for national resilience architecture. Your model is among the top 5 being reviewed. We would like to see your numbers and a live site. I stared at the message. Top 5. National resilience. That wasn't just money, it was legitimacy, and it would bring us directly into Voltura's lane. Nina and I spent 2 sleepless weeks preparing the live site in Nevada. We optimized storage transfer latency, integrated real-time climate data, tuned every thread like it was a violin solo for the world to hear. The review team arrived in a black van with tinted windows. They didn't say much, didn't smile, they asked hard questions, picked apart our schematics, tried to poke holes in our resilience algorithms, and they couldn't, not because we were flawless, but because we were honest. Our flaws were transparent. Our systems self-reported weaknesses. We didn't hide vulnerabilities, we fixed them in daylight. A week later, we received the formal invitation. LYNX Energy was now a finalist in the National Grid Modernization Initiative, a $14 billion program to deploy decentralized storage systems across the country. It was real, and now it was public. That night, Valerie Lin trended on TechCrunch, and so did the name Voltura Industries, because they weren't finalists. Within 24 hours, Voltura's PR team put out a statement. We applaud the spirit of innovation in this space and welcome collaboration for the greater good of energy development. Translation, we didn't expect this, and we are scrambling. Then came the email from Marcus. Val, Dad wants to talk. He says there's room for reconciliation. I stared at the message for a long time, not because I was tempted, but because, even now, he still thought this was about me rejoining them, not about becoming something they could never be part of. I never replied. At the Energy Summit in Atlanta, I saw them again. My father, Marcus, the board members who once smiled politely as I was escorted out. This time, they sat in the audience, and I was on stage. I wasn't flashy. I didn't pitch. I spoke quietly, clearly, and let the screen behind me tell the story. 94% uptime across 12 states. 0 carbon offsets needed. Real-time community control. Independent pricing models chosen by each region. I ended with this. Power should not be a product of privilege. It should be a right of infrastructure. And if legacy systems can't deliver that, then legacy needs to evolve or step aside. I didn't look at them, but I felt the shift in the room, the tension, the silence, the realization that the girl they once dismissed was now the woman rebuilding the grid beneath their feet. After the event, a senator approached me. Valerie, he said, if you win this bid, you're going to become a national utility in all but name. I shook his hand. Not a utility, I said, a movement, one node at a time. That night, back at our tiny motel, Nina looked at me across our shared laptop. She asked quietly, "Do you ever think we went too far?" I shook my head. No, they built an empire on control. We're building a future on consent. She raised a glass of warm tea, to the power we shared. I tapped mine gently against hers. Outside, the motel light flickered. Ours didn't. The room held more power than any circuit I'd ever wired. A former president, Fortune 500 CEOs, lawmakers, defense contractors, and of course, every major energy firm on the continent. The National Grid Modernization Summit wasn't just a stage, it was a battlefield. Only the weapons were data, credibility, and silence. The lights dimmed. A single spotlight illuminated the podium. The MC's voice echoed across the ballroom. Please welcome to the stage, Dr. Valerie Lin, co-founder and CEO of LYNX Energy. I walked forward, my heels tapping across the marble like a quiet drum roll. Not fast, not dramatic, just unshakable. Somewhere to the left, I saw my father, stone-faced in the front row. Marcus beside him, typing furiously on his phone. But no screen could stop what was coming. I looked at the audience. Not like I needed them to like me. Just to listen. 3 years ago, I began. I was escorted out of the building my mother helped found. I wasn't violent. I wasn't disruptive. I was inconvenient. A murmur stirred across the back rows. I let it settle. Then I smiled, calm, sharp, unhurried. Today, I return not to rejoin them, but to replace what no longer serves this country. Behind me, the screen came alive with metrics. LYNX uptime, 98.7%. Peak transfer efficiency, 92%. Deployment footprint, 22 states, 3 territories, 5 refugee zones. Outages prevented during last heat wave, 17,438. Then came the punchline. Cost to end user per kilowatt hour, $0, $6. A stunned silence, because Voltura charged $0, $22. They said decentralized power wasn't scalable. They said community-led grids were a fantasy. But the fantasy is thinking profit is more reliable than sunlight. That's when I dropped the real twist. I clicked to the final slide. LYNX Energy has officially declined private acquisition. All patents will be released under Creative Commons 4.0, effective next month. People gasped. Phones came up. Even the MC flinched. We didn't come here to sell power, I said. We came to give it back. The room was vibrating with the kind of tension that comes right before revolution. I heard a champagne glass shatter somewhere to the right. I didn't look, but I heard him. My father's voice, sharp and low. You're dismantling the entire economy. I turned to face him, not as his daughter, as his equal. I'm dismantling your version of it. He stood, tried to speak again, but something, maybe history, shoved him back into his chair. After the presentation, the press surged forward. CNN, Bloomberg, Al Jazeera, The Verge. Dr. Lin, how do you justify giving away billion-dollar tech? Are you concerned about being undercut or outproduced? Is this about revenge? I raised a hand. This is not revenge, this is redirection. We have enough corporations. What we need are ecosystems. I stepped down from the stage. And that's when Evelyn Kim, Director of Federal Innovation Grants, approached with a document in hand. The White House just signed off, she whispered. LYNX is officially being integrated as the central architecture for the new national energy web. You didn't just win, you rewrote the game. In the hallway, Marcus tried to intercept me. He looked tired, not defeated, just outpaced. Val, it didn't have to be this way. I stopped. No, it didn't. You all chose this way. I just walked it farther than you thought I could. He looked like he wanted to say more. But I turned and walked away before he had the chance. That evening, back at our operations center, Nina and I watched as LYNX Revolution trended across 41 countries. But that wasn't the part that made me pause. It was the photos. A child doing homework by LED light in El Paso, a midwife charging medical tools in South Sudan, a woman dancing in front of her first ever working fan in a Cambodian village. Power, shared, not sold. I received a letter 2 days later, from the legal estate of my mother. Inside was a handwritten note, sealed with wax. You didn't burn the system down, Valerie. You made it irrelevant. I thought the victory would be louder. Fireworks, backslaps, red carpets, but it was quieter than I imagined, like the hum of a microgrid at night, like the whisper of a name passed from one woman's hands to another's. 3 days after the summit, I stood alone in the workshop where LYNX began. That abandoned schoolhouse in Colorado with cracked floors and sunlight that always felt warmer than it should. We degrown beyond it. Now we had labs, campuses, field units, government contracts. But this place was origin. A tablet buzzed beside me. It showed a heat map of the new LYNX Nexus, power nodes spanning 47 U. estates, 12 First Nations reservations, and 3 refugee corridors abroad. Total users, 26 million. And counting. Nina walked in quietly, holding 2 mugs of coffee. Neither of us said anything at first. We didn't need to. The silence said, we did it. A week later, I was asked to speak at the reopening of Nguyen Hall of Clean Technology. Named after my mother, finally. The name she was erased from, the vision she was forced to bury. Now carved in steel over the door. When I stepped to the podium, there was no press frenzy. No scandal. No revenge narrative, just students. Mostly women, mostly brown, mostly like me 2 decades ago. I took a breath. This building is not made of steel. It's made of silence we broke. You've been told that power is something to earn, something to deserve. But that's not true. Power is something we build for each other. And the ones who truly carry it don't hoard it. They pass it forward like light. They stood and clapped, not wildly, not because they had to, but because they knew the story, because they were now part of it. That night I received one last letter, an envelope, no return address. Inside, 1 sheet of paper. A line, written in my father's handwriting. She would have been proud, I was too afraid to be. I stared at the note, not angry, not sad. Just still, then I folded it, placed it in the drawer beneath my mother's letter. 2 truths, written in ink, both of them fuel. Weeks passed, then months. And still, the current kept growing. A town in Mali powered its first clinic. A school in Appalachia ran completely off-grid. And in a coastal village in the Philippines, a child flipped a switch and said, the sun came inside. The board at Voltura resigned. The company was acquired, restructured, its name retired. No one remembered its brand slogan, but everyone remembered the day its silence was broken by a woman who refused to inherit their fear. Nina and I sat once more at the edge of a mountaintop where it all began. Our old prototype tower still stood, weathered and humming. She looked at me. Val, do you think we've done enough? I stared at the horizon. No, I said, and that's the best part. In my final interview, a young journalist asked, if you could go back to the day they fired you, what would you do differently? I smiled. Nothing, because without that silence, I would have never heard the current whispering my name. They tried to disconnect me, but what they didn't know is that I was never just a wire in their machine. I was the current.